Blog Talk Radio.
The New York Times calls it anti-feminist. CBS News calls it victim blaming. Feminists from around the world call it names you would never repeat in front of your children. It's avoiceformen.com, a website for men about men's issues, and a growing legion of men and women fed up with lies and corruption are calling it the de facto online source for news and information for men. VoiceForMen.com is the flagship of the men's rights movement. Much more than just a website, it's a straightforward reporting and analysis with no apologies. It is a growing media phenomenon, the birthplace of a Voice for Men radio online, and it is spreading a message of hope for men who thought there was nowhere to turn. If you have ever thought there was something wrong in the world between men and women, but you were afraid to say anything about it, come visit avoiceformen.com and find out what truth in action sounds like.
Domestic violence is not a gendered issue. It simply is not. Men and children are its victims about as often as women. And the dirty secret is most domestic violence between adults is mutual. On this show, we'll be exploring the intimate, painful, and vitally important topic of abuse within the family. We'll be sharing our perspectives and your own. We invite you to call in and discuss your views and experiences on the subject. Anyone of any age, sex, sexual orientation, or religious background is invited to call in to talk. We may not get to everyone, but we will do our best within the show's allotted time, and we plan on being here regularly. Before we begin, I thought I'd tell you about our show host. Erin Pizzey was born in 1939 in China while her father was stationed there as a member of the British Foreign Office, along with her mother and siblings. After being captured by the Japanese, Erin left China in 1942 and lived in the Middle East prior to her arrival in England in 1946. In 1971, Erin opened the first women's refuge, specifically to help female victims of domestic violence and their children. Although what she found there, and what decades of research has shown since then, more than half the women in her shelter were violent people themselves. Over the years, she tried to also create resources and safe spaces for men, but met with a lot of indifference and even hostility toward men suffering in this area. But it's a passion she continues to hold to this day for men, for women, and especially for their children. Erin is the author of Scream Quietly or the Neighbors Will Hear, the first internationally recognized popular book on domestic violence, first published in 1974. That book, along with newspaper, magazine, and television stories to report on her work, helped to spark an international movement to help battered women, a once taboo subject. In 1979, Erin came to the United States at the invitation of the U.S. government and embarked on a Salvation Army tour of 21 cities to help set up shelters for victims of domestic violence there too. Erin moved to the United States in 1982 to open a shelter and lecture on the subject of family violence. During that time, she also wrote and published novels as well as works of fiction, though she was consistently thwarted in her efforts to find direct ways to help men or even raise attention to the issue of men in domestic relationships. One of Erin's books, Prone to Violence, was subjected to a campaign by radical feminists to steal it from bookstore shelves and destroy it, so bookstores would be afraid to carry it and would lose money if they tried. A feminist publisher at HarperCollins eventually told Erin that she hated her books and would see to it that they would all be taken out of print and that she would never be published again. This threat was successful, at least until her book This Way to the Revolution was finally published a couple of years ago by Peter-owned publishers after 10 years of being rejected by most major publishers. This Way to the Revolution is a history of the early women's movement and their hijacking of the domestic violence movement. To this day, Erin is still regularly attacked and even slandered for making an assertion, even though it should not be refutable. After all, it's the documented truth. In intimate relationships, men and women are equally violent. We would like to take a moment to urge that if you wish to call in to share a personal experience to the show, you probably want to keep things on a first-name basis, probably even use a pseudonym for yourself or any family members, so there's no concern about someone coming after you or, for that matter, suing us. But we want to hear your personal stories and reflections. Welcome to Domestic Violence Revelations with Erin Pizzey. The truth about domestic abuse is often painful to hear, but in truth there is hope, and we hope you'll stick around to hear it. All right, thank you all. We're live now. Thank you all for coming to our first show of Domestic Violence Revelations with Erin Pizzey. Say hello to everybody, please, Erin.
Hello, everybody.
We're so glad you all came. We're dedicating today's show, the first show of Domestic Violence Revelations, to the late Earl Silverman. We wanted to also mention that Men's Rights Edmonton is hosting a memorial service for Earl Silverman today. In case you don't know already, Earl Silverman founded and operated the only domestic violence shelter for battered men in Canada. At the Norwood Legion at 11150 82 Street Northwest in Edmonton. They'll be kicking that off today at 1 o'clock Edmonton time. And we're going to have a moment of silence now for Earl, and if you're the praying type, please say a little prayer for him. Thank you all for everything you did for us, and we're going to try to continue your work and make a legacy for you. Erin, you knew Earl somewhat, did you not?
Yes, I first met him at the very first inclusive conference in Sacramento, California. And there he was. Actually, I've got pictures. They're on my Facebook of the two of us together with another woman called Pat Overberg, who everybody absolutely loved. She opened the first joint refuge for men and women. You call them shelters, I think. And he was lovely. He was a big, gentle, lovely person. And just like so many men, when they lose any hope, he basically couldn't go on with what he was trying to do. And here was his life's dream. But you know what? I think everybody's responded. And what it'll do, it'll make his death a fruitful life for others.
And that almost sounds cynical, but I don't know that I would say that. Didn't you go through a similar experience when you had a grandchild?
Yes, my grandchild committed suicide. And I remember the day I heard that he was dead, I'd just come out of the hospital having had cancer. I was only 2 days out of the hospital. I got out of my bed, got onto the computer, and I chose the law with my daughter, and we took the case to Strasbourg. And the Home Office had to back down, and we changed the law of England. This is what I call a fruitful death. That out of that terrible tragedy comes something that makes everybody proud to know his name, and I feel the same about Earl. Yes,
and a group that we know are doing some work elsewhere in Canada has founded something they're calling the Earl Silverman Center, which, you know, is in Montreal. And waiting on the line for us now, we have Murray Pearson and Christina Hansen, who are working on that project. Can we bring them on the line to speak about that?
Hello.
Hello. Christina, the Woolly Bumblebee.
Yes.
And Murray Pearson.
Hi there.
What can you guys tell us about
your?
It's going great. What can you guys tell us so far about what you're doing with your work on the Earl Silverman Center?
Well, we've got the incorporation papers for the nonprofit corporation filled out. It's actually the word center is legally protected in Quebec, so we're actually calling it the Earl Silverman Support Society. But Christina has been beavering away at home with her husband, getting an office set up. We've got a mailing address at my place, and yeah, we're busy.
Yeah. We're plowing ahead with this, so we're really excited. We've got people offering to volunteer at the center, even though the center is not even set up yet. So, it's amazing. It's
Congratulations.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I find that it's a wonderful thing. It's bringing people together that I personally haven't seen people brought together like this in quite a long time. So
yeah. I had an interesting experience the other night. I was without having some beers with a friend who's in the meetup group that we've just recently set up, and we wound up talking with a group of philosophy students. And I thought, this is either going to be absolutely dreadful or really cool, and fortunately it was the latter. And by the end of a couple of hours, we had 3 absolute converts ready to do absolutely anything for the society. It's amazing.
Yeah.
That's actually very hopeful to hear, because my next question was going to be if you'd faced any resistance or gotten any skepticism or scoffing or anything like that.
Not yet. Not yet. We are anticipating that we will probably run into somewhere along the line. However, being that we're in Montreal is in Quebec, it's a little different. There's more tolerance here for men's issues and
less social conservatism.
Yes, a lot less. So what we're hoping is, because there are no men's domestic violence shelters in Canada. Earl's was the only one. We do have different services for men only. We have homeless shelters that are only for men.
Mm-hmm.
There's also new housing units, I think it is.
They have. It's actually not new. The organization has been around and funded by the government for 35 years.
Yeah.
But basically, their terminology is for men, for troubled men, without really specifying what sort of trouble they're facing. But only men with kids.
Yeah.
And so the idea of the oxygen house, maison oxygène,
yeah,
is to give men a space where they can live for 3 months at a time and still maintain contact with their children.
Yeah, give them like a permanent address to have visitation at, and et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I said it's new is because they've started branching out now.
Oh,
like they're opening new centers in different areas of Montreal and Quebec, which is amazing. So, I'm hoping that when we open the Society for, the Earl Silverman domestic violence, that it sets sort of a precedent for the rest of Canada, saying that, this is a service that is needed, and, we need to set these up in different provinces, not just Quebec. So
there's another issue that we face in the domestic violence shelter, the whole area, and I'm sure that you can speak about this, Erin, and that is the fact that the entire community is really broken up and isolated. And so as a result, the services offered are patchy and inconsistent and very poorly documented. And so the second part of our mandate is to create an open database of information on all existing and new shelters, so that people anywhere can find out what services are available closest to them.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. I apologize.
Hello?
I apologize. I had a little connectivity trouble there, so I didn't hear what you just said. Sorry.
Okay.
Finish speaking. I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish what you were saying.
Okay. Well, basically, the main issue one of the big issues that I've identified is the fragmentation and isolation of the shelters that are existing. That they tend to be kind of hanging by themselves and just doing what they can all alone, and so it becomes very hard for them to let their presence be known, and it can be very easy for something like Maison Oxygène to go for years without being noticed, and without public awareness of the shelter is arguably useless. So we really need to find a way to set up. Basically, what we want to do is set up a database that will be both published by us on the web and also available through APIs, so other sites can use our data mine to present information to the public however they need to know.
Yeah.
And probably people doing this sort of thing can coordinate with each other. That's very exciting to hear. Erin, we've spoken about this, but I remember you started the first women's refuge. We call it shelters in the U.S. Same thing. And we've talked about this before, but maybe you could tell us a little more. When did you first decide you wanted to do something for men, and what was your experience like with that?
I very first decided a year after I'd actually opened the Centre for Women and Children in London in 1971, and I was aware that out of the first 100 women coming in, 62 were as violent as the men they left. That's not to say they weren't bruised and battered, they were, but the violence between the partners were equal. And some of the men were innocent, and the women coming in were lying about what they were saying. So I thought that certainly there should be. I've never seen it as a gender issue. It's not a gender issue. And personally, my own mother and father both were violent. My mother was physically much more violent to me than my father. So I've got a house in North London, well away from the refuges in West London. And for men, I got it for a peppercorn rent from the government. And opened it, but I could not get a penny out of any of the very wealthy men who would support women and children. They simply would not pay or help other men. And unfortunately, the men came in and we began to run it. But I found the big difference between men and women is if you put a group of women into a house, they'll take over and run it themselves virtually. You put a group of wounded men, they don't know how to cooperate with each other over emotional issues, and really even cleaning and cooking and washing and all the things that we all do quite naturally. And in the end, I just simply couldn't keep it going. That's why I feel so incredibly upset about Earl, because he was trying to do the same thing, and I had to let it go.
That's tragic. We need more men to step up and care about. Isn't it funny? We talk about helping our fellow man, and of course, in English, men is inclusive. It includes women, but then we say our fellow man, and then we don't do anything to help our fellow male human beings. And that's just, I think sometimes maybe it even goes against our instincts somehow. That it's not a rational thing, that
It's highly irrational. That's why it's so hard for a man to admit that his wife beats him. And I have so many men who will come, and they'll come for other reasons, and then before they leave, usually the door's open and they're on their way out, and they say, oh, by the way, and I say, come back in and tell me, it's all right.
I do know what you mean. I've heard this phrase used by at least two different psychologists for men who find themselves traumatized, especially by relationship issues. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase. It's called learned helplessness. Yes,
I use it for women as well. I don't like phrases very much because in each case is so unique. And in the case of a man who's been bullied and damaged and horrendously damaged by women, they're so much more isolated. We women, you see, can get together and share almost everything with each other. But for men, it's so lonely because very few men want to tell another man of what's been happening. And the fact is, I know because I've traveled all over the world talking to men's groups, most men, it's almost as though if another man admits a weakness, what comes out is either ridicule or contempt.
Well, he feels he's going to be lesser in the eyes of women, and he's going to be lesser in the eyes of men. And frankly, I'll just go ahead and say it, it's bullshit. Stop it.
I agree. Yeah.
Stop it.
Yeah. You know something? In about 20 years' time, when all these lies have been exposed, and the feminists have to accept the fact that they collected money under false pretenses, there is no issue of this being anything to do with patriarchy. It is proven now with MRI scans that domestic violence affects the brains of unborn fetus and also the newly born children. They are marinated in violence and given no chance. So we have to be very fierce about what we have to say on this program.
I think we do, and we have to personally, I hate the phrase man up, but if I were ever to use it, I would say if you're to man up by opening your mouth and telling your fellow men who you know and love and trust what's going on, and talk to people who know what you may be going through. And it can go the other way, right? I mean, literally hundreds. We put up a list of a couple of hundred already on the Voice for Men wiki database. Literally hundreds of studies have shown that women are about as equally violent in domestic violence situations as men are, and about half it's mutual.
Yeah, that's quite absolutely correct. Yes, you know. Sorry.
I'm not sure where that noise is coming from.
So just let's talk over it. As far as that,
James, could you mute Christina, please? All right, go ahead. Erin?
Okay. Well, my feeling about all this is that, as I said, both my parents were violent, and there were 3 children. I have a twin sister and a brother, and the violence affected all 3 of us differently. My brother was violent when he was older, given to knocking people out and losing his temper. My twin sister reacted to the violence and the screaming and the shouting by withdrawing. She turned in on herself. She had awful migraines and asthma and running eczema. Those were her symptoms. I was the one that got out there in the middle of everybody. I was the eldest, and I was the one who mediated most of the time, and I was the one that my father in the end would back down because I'd get very serious with him. Now, all 3 of us were damaged by what happened. And what I want to do is to talk to people who know that this has happened in their background, but want to learn how to transcend, how to put the nightmare of a childhood behind them, or the nightmare of a relationship they've had. So many people go on to have a second relationship and are very, very happy. But it's like there's 3 people in the relationship. There's the new partner and the happiness, but there's post-traumatic stress disorder, so it feels like there's 3 people in that relationship. The man, his new partner, and the old partner, and he has to learn how to get rid of the old partner.
And I'll tell you what, too, another thing, men, it's very, very dangerous. You've got to be very careful. But I just did say that about half of all domestic violence relationships are mutual. And then what you'll have then is you'll have a man who may have struck his girlfriend or his wife, and even though she was spitting at him and slapping him and throwing things at him, and they were in something nasty together, but he's filled with horror and shame and is afraid to tell anybody. And I don't know, there's a huge danger of being arrested if you even confess to something like that. But I think just the knowledge, wait a minute, yes, I did hit her and I feel horrible about it, but she hit me, and it was just a horrible situation. We need to build and sometimes he never hit her, and sometimes he's just the victim, but about half the time it's mutual, and men need to be able to talk about those experiences too and not feel that it's always entirely them. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not that simple, right?
You're absolutely right. No, because violent relationships, and of course, in a sense, you can be extremely violent without ever touching your partner, but you're verbally violent. In many cases, and I always say this, the bruises and bones can heal, but those words can stay forever. And it's very important that we include that kind of violent bullying that can go on in a relationship. Because, it's one thing to destroy the body, but when the mind is destroyed, it is such a tragedy. And also for the children.
I've been through that, and maybe I'll talk about it one of these days on the show. But let's bring Christina and Murray back on. I know Murray had a little something more he wanted to tell us, and then we have another caller on the line we'll bring on. Christina, Murray, you wanted to tell us a little more?
Yeah, actually, I've got a few points that have come up in the last minute. Erin was talking about the syndrome of finding yourself in this violent situation, and there are one of the issues that I faced personally was when my first wife became violent, I did not become violent in return, and so as a result, I was beaten up, and then when the police came, they threw me out because I'm a man. And there was no consideration of behavior at any point. It was just, we identified the man, therefore we throw him out. And there was nothing that I could do about it at any point. And then also she mentioned that some people find themselves in good relationships in the future, and that's precisely what's happened to me. My wife, Megan, is an absolute marvel. And we do our best to throw the ghost of my ex-wife out, but it's really tough. It really is.
I know it is. I know how difficult.
Yeah, my daughters are gone, and actually on Reddit, your advice to me was just to let them go forever, and I can't accept that. I just can't.
I
even
can
though
understand
I know you're
that,
right.
but can I just say something to you? I understand that you can't just say that, but on the other hand, your daughters need to actually, because they have been alienated from you. They're holding a history of who you are that isn't you at all. Do you feel that?
Yes.
They don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm hoping.
Yeah.
How old are they now?
The eldest is going to be 18 next year. The younger is 15.
Well, you've got plenty of time, and let me tell you something.
Maybe 16 now. Mm-hmm.
What I feel is that give them time to get into real life, away from their mother, where they meet other situations and other people, and hopefully they will come back to you as adults and recognize your worth. This advice was given to me by Anna Freud, Freud's daughter. Before she died, we spent an afternoon together. And I was talking just about this, and she said, they will have to tear away from you to come back to you and know who you are.
There's a phrase that's been used that's very hard for any parent to hear, but it's called like divorcing your children.
Yeah.
And it's something you almost have to do for your own psychological survival and to continue onward, which is to accept the current situation. You can't count on them coming back, but they very well might. No one can promise you that they'll come back, so you need to be open to it, but at the same time, accepting that the situation is beyond your control, as horrible as it is a part of your own personal healing. I can tell you that I myself am an alienated child. I was alienated from my father severely. And I know that this did serious damage to me. I eventually did start having a relatively decent relationship with my father, but gosh, it was only the last few years, and I'm in my 40s now. And it was very hard because for the longest time I held on to the lies about him. Not that he was a perfect man, but so many things about him were, even the things that were flaws in him were so greatly amped up and exaggerated by my mother due to her absolute hatred of him. But usually an alienator eventually makes a mistake. I think my mother's fatal mistake in that case was to start using his name as a weapon against me. You're just like him. And eventually, while that used to hurt, I didn't know why it hurt, and then I realized maybe I am like him and maybe I need to know him better. So I don't want to offer false hope. I do want to say you need to do what you need to do to emotionally distance yourself and heal and wait and hope that, if you see what I mean.
The quality of your loving will never, never fade, and you will always love them, and hopefully. And I've seen it many times. I'm 74 years old now, and I've been working at this since I was 30. And I do see over time, and the terrible thing is, the alienator ends up more alienated from the children. She tried to stop seeing the partner at the end. So nobody wins in this. It's just a question of training and teaching parents that they have no right to poison their children's minds.
Okay. We're going to move on. Christina and Murray, we wish you every luck with the Earl Silverman Society. We're going to continue to let people know about what you're doing and hope we get some regular updates on it. You guys want to tell us anything else before you go?
Nothing at the moment other than to go to www.earlsilvermancenter.org. And to check out the website. You can support us there, and we're also updating the blog all the time with, updates on where we are and where we're headed and how we're doing, and so you can stay abreast of all our work on that site.
And you can spell center with ER or RE.
Yeah.
Both domains.
Oh, that's cool.
Very
Earl
British.
Silverman Center. There you go. Well, thank you so much. Bless you, too, for picking up the torch and carrying on. And we'll also be sure to keep people updated here on this show and on A Voice for Men. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Murray.
Thank you, Dean.
Right.
Thank you, Erin.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we have Iron John, who would like to come on and ask us a question. John, are you available?
Yes, I am. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who is listening. Hello, Erin. Hello, James. Hello, Dean. First time on the radio. A little nervous here. Okay. Thank you, Dean. Erin, I'm an admirer. I'm an admirer of yours, and the reason I'm an admirer of yours is that you spoke a very unpopular truth. And that takes a lot of courage. For those people who, I suppose, share your views, what would you recommend they do to try and help bring this knowledge to the rest of the public?
I think it has to start at the very beginning, and I think everybody has to be aware of this huge lie. And because until we get past the huge complications because of being told, and young children being told, that it is all men who are the brutes and the beasts. I'll give you an example. A father rang me the other day. He took his children into a men's room to change them because they were at a theme park. And there were 16 posters on the walls of women with bruised faces. And the boys were sort of 7, 8, and 9, well able to look at that and ask their father what that meant. Now, I think that's an absolute outrage for all men. And
in fact, it's teaching young boys to internalize something that's horribly unhealthy for them.
Yes, exactly. And now it's a question of tackling the Home Office who've done this in our government. We have to fight back and do something about the lie. We have to disband this billion-dollar industry, which is called and funds feminism. It doesn't fund shelters. It isn't in any way good for anybody. That has to go. But more importantly, more men have to come forward and actually support each other. And I've traveled all around the world talking to men's groups, and they very rarely actually stay together. Men have got to learn that they need to take care of each other.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Do you?
If it takes a woman to tell us that, then that's what it takes. Go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Dean. Erin,
Yes.
what do you think the best way is that we could start to do that?
Men
to teach men to do this, to show them that it's okay.
It's okay to make real friends with other men, not going to sports all the time, not talking. Men do things in groups, and they'll talk about almost everything else except anything personal. It's certainly better than it was in my childhood, but it's still a case of women get together and they are a force of solace for each other. Men don't operate that way, and therefore and it's almost like men don't bruise and men don't bleed because they don't ever show that side of themselves. And men are very vulnerable in many ways. I've always found in my refuge work, and I've had a refuge in America as well as in England, I've always found girls are so much more resilient than the boys, and the boys get damaged terribly badly, particularly with a mother's violence and rejecting of them.
I think men do communicate different, and so women. It's a stereotype, but stereotypes are based on something, and women love chattering together, and men like talking about things. But I don't think we need to emulate women, but just lose that fear of saying, hey, something happened to me, guys. I want to talk about it. You don't have to do those stereotype feminist, be whatever, find your inner, the female side of your personality or whatever that crap is. You don't have to do that. There's nothing wrong with saying things in a manly things, but reaching out to your brother and saying, man, I'm hurting and something's going on, and maybe you could advise me about this. You know what I'm saying?
Dean,
yeah, I think. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I interrupted again.
Listen, it doesn't matter. What's important too, I think, is men and women behave so differently. As women, we will naturally fall in and talk to each other about almost anything. It's very, very hard for a man to be disloyal to his wife, to his partner. I find it's quite extraordinary. I find men who have had appallingly violent mothers and incestuous mothers, that secret stays with them, and it takes such a lot of hard work to get them to feel that they can say it. These things do happen, and it happened to him, and it screwed up his entire life. And he's probably on drugs, he's probably drinking, he's doing anything rather than face what is hurting him.
Yes,
you had something you wanted to say there, John? Go ahead.
Yes, please. Thank you, Dean. I think the biggest obstacle that we have is finding a way to give men permission to feel that they have permission to say these things and to do it in such a way that is non-threatening, that is supportive, that is, almost like the internet where people are anonymous, and that's where the manosphere grew, I think, because we finally had a place to tell the truth.
I think that's wonderful. See, I think this is the value, hopefully, of this program, because you're safe. We're safe to talk to each other. And you've never had, there's never been any real comfort for men. It's stretched now, not just to domestic violence, but all the way through society's attitude. And we have a minister for women, for instance, who stood up and basically said, as far as she's concerned, the new family unit is women and children. Because men, she said, are not necessarily harmonious to family life. That's a minister. And that is the policy. She's a Labour minister, and she hasn't stopped. We had our Prime Minister, David Cameron, announcing that single-parent mothers were all heroines, and men are fickle. That's not the truth. There are as many fickle women as there are fickle men. And the majority of cases, the man is barred from seeing his child.
Or reduced to very brief visitation, which isn't being a father.
No.
And these things have to change. They have to change in law. They have to change in social attitudes.
And the government have absolutely got to stop propping up the feminist banks, because the amount of money that goes, it's $1 billion for BAWA in America a year, that goes mostly on punishing men, programs to punish men for being men.
In case anybody's new to any of these things, Erin just said something that you'll often get accused of being a conspiracy theorist and a tinfoil hat wearer. You say feminist this and feminist that, because there's a lot of people out there who just think feminism is just this thing that's about equality. And if you're one of those people, I guess this doesn't apply to you, but what too many people are not aware of is that there are very large, very powerful feminist organizations with a lot of money, taking a lot of charitable donations, taking a lot of political donations, getting political appointments in governments all around the world, including the United States. And this money, it's a lot of it. And it's in the hands of ideological feminists with an agenda that's not, and a view of men and women that's not really based on reality. And so if you're calling yourself a feminist, but you haven't bothered to educate yourself on how money is being spent on your behalf, well, you're not responsible, but you're giving cover to some very horrible people doing some horrible things. And there's plenty of evidence on that if you just ask and start asking, where's that money going and who's spending it on what? It is billions of dollars.
Yeah.
United Nations, U.S. governments, U.S. state governments, Canadian government, Australian government, UK government, United Nations, I think I just said, it's a lot of money and it's a lot of power, and if you're not aware of it, you need to be aware of it. John, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Just thank you for taking my call, and have a good day, everyone.
Bless you, John.
John, you are a great men's human rights advocate, and we're happy to have you on the show. Okay, I believe we have another caller, Andre. Can we bring him on the line?
Hello?
Hello?
Andre?
Oh,
Am I saying your name
Andre.
right?
Yes, you're saying them correctly. I want to mention that basically at the start of the show you had made, I suppose, a connection between Erin Pizzey's work and Silverman's work. And I wanted to talk about how, I suppose, the fates of these activities. As in, Erin, it's my understanding that you are 25 years old, and you started off with domestic abuse, I suppose, campaigning, working on the shelters, in your youth. And it's only now, I suppose, that you have managed to break through the feminist censorship and to actually bring your ideas on the internet and so forth. But when it's noteworthy that you had survived homelessness, in fact, and harassment in your efforts to do so. And I contrast that in a sense with Earl Silverman's efforts in that he worked likewise for many years on domestic abuse support. And unfortunately, in the end, due to the cold shoulders experience from the state in finding funding, due to losing the domestic abuse shelter he had, in fact, his house, he decided to commit suicide. And I just think it was a horrible thing what happened, and how it would have been equally horrible if it would have happened to Erin Pizzey, and likewise how horrible it would be if it were to happen to other people who are campaigning on abuse or on other topics with human rights, men's rights. And it's just worth bearing in mind that whereas Earl Silverman didn't in 2013 manage to see his efforts come to fruition, the fact that there are no domestic abuse shelters for men right now in Canada doesn't mean there will be in the near future, in the next several years, maybe the next decade, the next 20 years. And the idea is that it's, I suppose, an inspiration to see how Erin Pizzey's work has managed to rise to the surface after so much hardship, and how I would really wish that people who were campaigning on these topics and were contemplating suicide would stop and consider that if they, I suppose, hang on for longer, if they work for longer, and if they network for longer with like-minded people, they could actually get their efforts to fruition, just as Erin Pizzey has managed to do.
You make a Dre, in point of fact, and this is something those of us in the men's human rights movement often bring up, and is even just to the subject of suicide. I'm sure many of our listeners know it, but perhaps some of you who are new to all this don't know it. In the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, the number of men who kill themselves is literally 3 or 4 to 1 to the suicide rate for women. 3 or 4 men kill themselves for every 1 woman who does so. And, you know, I think of all the talk we hear about things like anorexia, which is predominantly a female problem, not entirely, because there are some men who suffer from anorexia and bulimia, but it's a mostly female problem. Yet we don't hear enough about suicide, which is a mostly male phenomenon. Young men, middle-aged men, it's overwhelmingly a male problem. And in our part of the world, I don't know, where are you from, Andre?
I'm from Romania.
From where?
Romania.
Romania. Romania. Okay, I don't know what it looks like in Romania, but I've seen worldwide figures, and in most countries, men are more likely to kill themselves. And I know in our part of the world, not only are men 3 to 4 times as likely to kill themselves, but in the wake of divorce, that shot up to about 10 to 1. Men lose their families, their homes, and they lose all hope, and they just kill themselves. And I remember once, just within the last year, I mentioned this to a guy who worked at a suicide hotline, and he refused to concede that this was any sort of a problem. That anybody...
He shouldn't have been working on the hotline. That's
you would think. I mean, he was giving me some sort of runaround about how, well, everybody who calls the suicide hotline is equally important. But, you know, because if you're talking about suicide, that's the same thing as suicide. And I could not get through to this man that if you don't develop programs and an attitude to realize that if there's a man on the line, he's significantly more likely to not be here tomorrow than the woman you're talking to, and you need to rethink how your approach to these things. I don't know what to do with you. And he wouldn't hear it.
Let me just say something. That one of the reasons I actually decided we'd have to have a men's refuge almost immediately after I opened was one of our husbands actually took his car around to the back of the refuge and carbon monoxided himself. I know. And the tragedy of that is the young policeman who came to tell the wife said to her, I have something terrible to say to you, madam. Would you like to sit down? And he said, I'm afraid your husband has killed himself. And she just said, well, thank God for that. I know. And the main thing I'd point out, you know, all the history of the refuge in England for 12 years, many women had attempted suicide, virtually all of them. And it was seen as a cry for help. And that's the difference, whereas men don't talk about it because men are afraid of being seen as weak, and men basically just go and do it. My feeling is that until we change our whole Western attitude towards men as valuable, wonderful fathers to our children, lovers to their wives, the men are going to continue to kill themselves in these numbers.
That even goes back to the point. One of the points we've made earlier, yes, there are women who are battered. Yes, there are women who need help. But we have this angelic idea of the women who run to these refuges, to these shelters. And no, we know a good half the women in them are themselves violent and abusive. Your husband just killed himself, and all you can say is thank God.
But the problem is that now with the shelters and the refuge in England, what they do is they won't take women who have drug problems. They won't take women who have alcohol problems. These are the women that need our help because they have children and they have partners. They're just actually figured out. So the most important thing is for all of us, apart from men and women, is to find the women who are violent and abusive to their children and give them a second chance, because most of them and many of the men have come from being battered and abused as children, and they're just repeating patterns. We have to start, not end up with full of mental hospitals and prisons full of men and women, because that's just too late, because the next generation of children are coming up behind them. We have to get away from all the politics of domestic violence and look at the human needs.
Andre, you were about to say something about what you've seen in Romania?
Well, not Romania necessarily, because I previously looked at suicide statistics for the Western world, for example, in Portugal, in Italy, in France, in the UK. You can easily find them on the internet, actually. And what I found was that in all of the Western countries in which suicide rates shot up for men, they shot up around the time when feminism arrived in these countries. I think it's noteworthy. I'm not sure how credible this is because I didn't investigate very thoroughly, but that's what I noticed preliminarily, I suppose. And I also wanted to mention something regarding what we've all said about men not talking and women then prepared to talk. I think, as far as I've noticed, men tend to have a drive to do things, whereas women tend to have a drive to influence people to do things, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because, for example, a woman is more likely to share her feelings with other people and to find it fruitful for other people to share their feelings with her. But in the case of men, it may be more that men tend to want to get concrete results. And so I think that maybe, I'm just suggesting, it would be beneficial to look at that and to look at how men could be helped, not in terms of talking so much as, I guess, strategizing, deciding on how to pursue action, to pursue plans that can get results done. Maybe that's a useful way to approach things. I don't know.
I think you make a very good point, Andre. I mean, I had mentioned this earlier. It's not appropriate to expect men to process their emotions exactly the same way women do. They do need to talk, but men also need to act. There's a psychologist I talk to sometimes. We're online friends. Tom Golden. He runs a YouTube channel that everybody should check out. It's called Men Are Good.
Yeah.
And he's a psychologist, and he even has a very interesting video up. I don't have time, but it's about how men process emotions like grief, and how it's been shown cross-culturally, worldwide, men respond to grief and pain differently. And one of the things is they respond by action, by doing things, whether it's writing or building something or something that it helps them to do something. So ironically, one of the things the men's movement may actually offer men who are grieving is a way of doing things, helping with the shelter, helping to get involved online. The internet seems to be very effective of getting guys not just to talk to each other, but make plans and take action. So for men, doing is as important as talking, but it needs to be a little of both, I think. So, all right. And Andre, did you want to say anything else?
Well, actually, I wanted to ask Erin Pizzey something. I've seen certain documentaries. For example, there's Konstcricket, I think it's called, in Sweden. Konstcricket is classed as gender war, and it is an inside look into the feminist domestic abuse industry, if I can call it that. There was a shelter for women somewhere in Sweden in which a few women were interviewed, and they talked about how the shelter had encouraged them to, I guess, become separatists, as in separate themselves from men entirely. And I could tell just the sadness on their faces and how difficult it was for them, but how they had decided to accommodate themselves to that idea, that all men were potential abusers and that they needed the support and protection of feminism in order to defend themselves from feminism. It was just horrible watching them.
I know. I just wanted. Okay, you go. Okay. Right.
Well, I just wanted to point out. I know this young woman who is a mainstream feminist, I suppose, and she had also experienced abuse in her house, and because of that, she had gone towards feminism. And I know that feminism might have influenced a lot of people to, I guess, take an adversarial view as opposed to trying to find a holistic view towards abuse. This is what I mean. That's what I wanted to know about was your experiences, what you have seen in terms of feminism, I guess, co-opting vulnerable victims.
Can you pray that for me? Because the line isn't very good, Dean.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to know what your experiences were in terms of feminism co-opting abuse victims, female abuse victims, to become radical, I suppose, and to want
Yes, I mean, No, in fact, there was when I was in Canada, and I was traveling across the whole of Canada with Senator Ann Cools talking to men's groups. And I also became involved looking at some of the shelters. And many shelter workers came to talk to me. And they said this is exactly what was happening. They were actually, they believed in that, like we all do, in equality for feminism, equity feminism. But they found when they were working in the shelters that they were actually, in a sense, bunkers for brainwashing. And not only that, we found in England that an awful lot of women solicitors, and you call them attorneys, I think, but solicitors would advise women if they wanted to get the divorce moving to say that they had been abused. And in Canada, there are two things. The man comes home, he finds his house empty, most of it's gone, and he can't find his wife and kids. That's called hoovering. And then if that doesn't work and she doesn't get what she wants, she then uses what's called a silver bullet, which is actually saying that the father of the children has molested them. And these two factors will finish him off forever, because for what's happening now is men across the Western world have lost the right to be innocent until proven guilty. They're proven guilty from the moment an allegation is made with absolutely no evidence, and they lose everything. Do you wonder that men kill themselves?
It's true, and it infuriates people. But I've even known people, women who've been in these shelters, and they said that it was a very odd and weird and strange environment, and it did feel more about indoctrination than anything else. And that again goes back to I'm a little more patient than a lot of my fellow men's advocates. If you're a feminist and you're hearing all this and you're saying this is daft, this is loony, I don't believe these things, I don't do these things, that's just the exception. You are not paying attention to what people with money and power are doing in your name, and you need to find out. And I'm just going to keep saying that. I don't hate you, but there are people doing things in the name of your movement, very powerful people. It's not a conspiracy, it's an ideology.
Yeah,
and you need
right.
to know that.
Yeah.
Especially in Sweden. There's crazy things going on now in Sweden. Andre there was talking about, I couldn't say the name right,
Kronstreet, I think.
Kronstreet. I'm sure somebody Swedish is laughing at us, but it means the gender war. And what's going on in the name of feminism in places like in Sweden especially, but other Scandinavian countries, it's quite frightening. Just how much they hate men, and just how much every evil thing in the world to them is caused by men, and everything that's good in humanity is to be found in women. And, well, it's grossly insulting to women, and it's truly oppressive toward men, this attitude.
Well, they're now trying to bring in a law that says that it will be a criminal offense to criticize feminism in those countries. Now, that is very frightening. That's totalitarian.
It truly is. There's an old saying, it's been said, it's not clear who first said it. Some say it Robespierre, some say, I don't remember who said it first. It's been attributed to a few, but to know who rules you, find out who you are allowed to criticize. And you're not allowed to criticize feminists or feminism. Who's really in charge then?
Well, certainly in those countries, it's a feminist ideology that's in charge.
Yeah, I see Danny Boy here is attributing that to Voltaire. There have been a few other people who it's been attributed to. But, yeah, just because they're women, they're girls, they're harmless, right? No, I'm afraid not. And the men who enable them are no better. Maybe they're even worse.
Actually, in a way, I did feel that. Those femme men who essentially, they know the truth, but they prefer, and it's easier to concur. It's interesting, because I went to Slovenia a while ago. I was invited to go by a men's group again. And when I was there, the minister for one of the, I think she was the minister for, she was the ombudswoman, I think. Anyway, she told me very, very proudly that of her staff, she had 40 staff, 39 were women, one was a man, and he was a receptionist. And I thought, my goodness, what fun that estrogen soup might be. The fact is, men and women work much better when they work together and in harmony. Both sides, men and women, need each other. And yes, I absolutely think women should be in the boardrooms. I think women should do whatever they like. But to actually bar men like that. Then I talked to an awful lot of the very powerful women who are in Slovenia and politicians, and most of them had house husbands. And they were not happy with their house husbands. That's the thing that I came away with. It doesn't work.
Yes, you say you want this equality, and you say you're perfectly happy to let the man stay home in the supposedly oppressive home environment, because that's supposedly terribly oppressive to be at home taking care of the children and cooking and cleaning. Oh, that's drudgery slavery. But then you get a man who does it for him, and you have no respect for him.
Yeah, that is what happens.
Make sense of it, if you will.
Well, we will. We're going to go on and on and on until we actually do make sense of it, and we have a big enough audience who will also make sense of it, and will make changes.
And the phrase they use to shut us up, at least maybe not you, but us men, is you're a misogynist, you hate women, that's the reason you're saying these things. And I'll tell you, as a man, and I bet you every man listening to here who's had that thrown at him, being called a misogynist stings, at least the first few times it's thrown at you. It stings. It hurts. That's why it's so effective, right?
But you have to remember, as far as feminists are concerned, men don't bruise and men don't bleed. They're just men. They're automats. They're robots. Essentially, when you dehumanize half the human race, you're lost already.
And here's the great irony of it. If we were misogynists, then if you called us misogynists, it wouldn't hurt. We'd laugh and say, you're right. But of course, men love women. Maybe that's our greatest weakness. We utterly love women. Even the ones who've been burned, even the ones who've grown angry toward women, in their hearts they absolutely love and adore women. It's probably our greatest vulnerability.
I think that's true, that and your chivalry.
Yeah.
And I know, and I think that one of the most difficult things is to look at how it is now, and I think we have to be very honest about this. Women are in a pole position probably for the first time in history in the Western world. They get everything. If there's a divorce or a separation or they throw a man out, they can do it now and keep everything, and the man is left on his own outside the family structure. And that, so it's wrong.
It is wrong, and it not only hurts him, it hurts his children, and although not in all cases, you wind up with the woman who feels this heady rush of power because she's managed to do all these things, and within a year or two, she's miserable.
I know that was. I went back when I came back to England, and I went around an awful lot of people I know who'd rushed to divorce in the 70s with a no-thought divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a little survey of my own, and I said to each of and every one of them, if you had the chance again, would you have kicked your husband out? And virtually every one of them said, no, I wouldn't.
There you go.
And also, I go to LA a lot because my son's there, and I'll be going for 3 months this summer. And I have a lot of lovely, warm, loving women in their late 30s panicking about the fact that they will not be able to have children in the next few years. They want to be married. They want what we all had before the beginning of the feminist movement. And the men are not going anywhere. They're not committing themselves. And you can't blame them. It isn't a question of whether they love or not. They can't face what this means these days, a relationship with a woman. It comes with a terrible price tag.
It does come for a terrible price tag for men. It's a very big risk for men. And then on the other side, even from the woman's point of view, from the young woman's point of view, she's been somehow told her whole life that happiness and fulfillment come from career, of making money out there in the real world and getting a job. And you often have to wonder, did anybody bother asking the average working stiff male whether his career was the most important thing in his life? Most guys I know don't like having to get up and go to work every day. They're not going to go and become CEOs of big corporations.
Their biggest aspiration may be to middle management, and maybe only half of them will make it to that. Working is work, and not particularly pleasant for most people. And yet we've told young women, yes, this is what you should do. This is where you'll find your fulfillment. Have your children later in life, and then they hit their mid-30s, and their baby alarm clocks start going off, and finding the man who will do it with them, well, wow, that becomes a big challenge, doesn't it? And then they start resenting men, and it's a whole vicious, unhealthy cycle for everybody. Which is not to say that I'm saying every woman should go back to having babies and being housewives full-time as their entire existence. No, but we've sent the wrong message and the wrong set of priorities.
I think that's true, because I think I always looked at it when all this business came up about how we all had to have jobs. My job was shorthand typist, secretary, which I didn't love. I always wanted, like an awful lot of women in my generation, I wanted to be happily married with a family. I wanted to work part-time when the children got older. Well, now, by law, you can't do that. By now, if you're a woman and for some reason your husband's left, whatever the reason, you can't stay home with your children. By the age of 7, you're forced to get a job, so there's nobody home for the children. And that is shocking that we've got to this stage.
It really is. All right. Well, I'd like to turn the topic back towards the pain and the difficulties of domestic violence, domestic abuse. And what I'd like to do now is we have a reading of one of your essays, Erin.
Yeah.
One of your classic essays called "The Family Terrorist." When did you write that?
Quite a long time ago, actually. I wrote that when I was in America, before I went down to the Cayman Islands. Yeah. So it would be in the 80s.
Well, our friend Girl Writes What recently did Karen Strawn did a very nice reading of it. And we're going to go ahead and take a break and play that now. If you haven't read this essay, you should. You may recognize some of your own relationships in it. James, can we cue that up?
This is a reading of The Family Terrorist by Erin Pizzey. Those of us working in the field of domestic violence are confronted daily by the difficult task of working with women in problematic families. In my work with family violence, I have come to recognize that there are women involved in emotionally and/or physically violent relationships that express and enact disturbance beyond the expected and acceptable scope of distress. Such individuals, spurred on by deep feelings of vengefulness, vindictiveness, and animosity, behave in a manner that is singularly destructive to themselves as well as to some or all of the other family members, making an already bad family situation worse. These women I have found it useful to describe as family terrorists. In my experience, men are also capable of behaving as family terrorists, but male violence tends to be more physical and explosive. We have had thousands of international studies about male violence, but there is very little about why or how women are violent. There seems to be a blanket of silence over the huge figures of violence expressed by women. Because family terrorism is a tactic largely used by women, and my work in the domestic violence field is largely with women, I address this problem discussing only my work with women. The potential for terrorism may rest dormant for many years, emerging in its full might only under certain circumstances. I found that in many cases it is the dissolution or threatened dissolution of the family that calls to the fore the terrorist's destructiveness. It is essential to understand that prior to dissolution, the potential terrorist plays a role in the family that is by no means passive. The terrorist is the family member whose moods reign supreme in the family, whose whims and actions determine the emotional climate of the household. In this setting, the terrorist could be described as the family tyrant, or within the family, this individual maintains the control and power over the other member's emotions. The family well may be characterized as violent, incestuous, dysfunctional, and unhappy, but it is the terrorist or tyrant who is primarily responsible for initiating conflict, imposing histrionic outbursts upon otherwise calm situations, or more subtly and invisibly, quietly manipulating other family members into uproar through guilt, cunning taunts, and barely perceptive provocations. The quiet, manipulative terrorist usually is the most undetected terrorist. Through the subtle creation of perpetual turmoil, this terrorist may virtually drive other family members to alcoholism, to drug addiction, to explosive behavior, to suicide. The other family members, therefore, are often misperceived as the family problem, and the hidden terrorist as the saintly woman who puts up with it all. While the family remains together, however miserable that togetherness might be, the terrorist maintains her power. However, it is often the separation of the family that promises to rend the terrorist's domain and consequently to lessen the power. Family dissolution, therefore, often is the time when the terrorist feels most threatened and most alone and most dangerous. In this position of fear, the family terrorist sets out to achieve a specific goal. There are many possible goals for the terrorist, including reuniting the family once again, or ensuring that the children, if there are children in the relationship, remain under the terrorist's control, or actively destroying the terrorist's spouse or ex-spouse emotionally, physically, and financially. When it was evident to Adolf Hitler that winning the war was an absolute impossibility, he ordered his remaining troops to destroy Berlin. If he could no longer rule, then he felt it best for his empire to share in his own personal destruction. Similarly, the family terrorist, losing or having lost supremacy, may endeavor to bring about the ruin and, in some extreme cases, the death of other family members. The family terrorist, like the political terrorist, is motivated by the pursuit of a goal. In attempting to disarm the family terrorist, it is vital that the practitioner begin intervention by trying to recognize and understand the terrorist's goal. The source of the terrorist's goal, as in the case of the political terrorist, usually can be understood to spring from some legitimate grievance. The grievance's legitimacy may be regarded in terms of justified feeling of outrage in response to an actual injustice or injury, or the legitimacy may exist solely in the mind of the terrorist. Whether this legitimacy be real or imagined, the grievance starts as the impetus for the terrorist's motivation. One hallmark of an emotional terrorist is that this motivation tends to be obsessive by nature. Whence this obsession? Why this overwhelmingly powerful drive? In many cases, that which the terrorist believes to be the grievance against the spouse actually has very little to do with the spouse. Although the terrorist may be consciously aware only of the spouse's alleged offense, the pain of this offense, real or imagined, is invariably an echo of the past, a mirrored recreation of some painful situation in the terrorist's childhood. I will not describe here in any detail the types of childhood that tend to create the subsequent terrorist. I will say, however, that invariably the terrorist's childhood, once understood, can be seen as violent, emotionally and or physically. Also, invariably, the terrorist can be regarded as a violence-prone individual. I define a violence-prone woman as a woman who, while complaining that she is the innocent victim of the malice and aggression of all other relationships in her life, is in fact a victim of her own violence and aggression. A violent and painful childhood tends to create in the child an addiction to violence and to pain, an addiction on all levels, the emotional, the physical, the intellectual, the neurochemical, an addiction that then compels the individual to recreate situations and relationships characterized by further violence, further danger, further suffering, further pain. Thus, it is primarily the residual pain from childhood, and only secondarily the pain of the terrorist's current familial situation, that serves as the terrorist's motivating impetus. There is something pathological about the terrorist's motivation, for it is based not so much on reality as on a twisting, a distortion, a reshaping of reality. Because the emotional terrorist is a violence-prone individual, addicted to violence, the terrorist's actions must be understood as the actions of an addict. When the family was together, the terrorist found fulfillment for any number of unhealthy appetites and addictions. When that family then dissolves, the terrorist behaves with all the desperation, all the obsession, all the single-minded determination of any addict facing or suffering withdrawal. The single-mindedness, the one-sidedness of feeling is perhaps the most important shibboleth of the emotional terrorist. Furthermore, the extent of this one-sidedness is, for the practitioner, perhaps the greatest measure and indicator of how extreme the terrorist's actions are capable of becoming. Any person suffering an unhappy family situation or the dissolution of a marriage or relationship will feel some pain and desperation. A relatively well-balanced person, however, will not only be aware of their own distress, but also sensitive in some degree to the suffering of the other family members. For example, reasonably well-balanced parents, when facing divorce, will be most concerned with their children's emotional well-being, even beyond their own grief. Not so the emotional terrorist. To the family terrorist, there is only one wronged, one sufferer, only one person in pain, and this person is the terrorist herself. The terrorist has no empathy and feels only her own pain. In this manner, the terrorist's capacity for feeling is narcissistic, solipsistic, and in fact, pathological. Again, I will not attempt to detail the factors in childhood that lead to the creation of an emotional terrorist. What is, however, evident in the terrorist's limited or non-existent ability to recognize other people's feelings is that the terrorist's emotions and awareness at crucial stages of childhood development were stunted from reaching beyond the boundaries of the self due to a multiplicity of reasons. Later, the adult terrorist went on to make a relationship that was, on some level, no true relationship, but a reenactment of childhood pain, scenarios, situations, and scripts. Throughout the relationship, the solipsistic terrorist did not behave genuinely in response to the emotions of other family members, but self-servingly used them as props for the recreation of the terrorist's program. And when the relationship finally faces dissolution, the terrorist is aware only of her own pain and outrage, and feeling no empathy for other family members will proceed single-mindedly in pursuit of her goal, whether that goal is reunion, ruin, or revenge. The terrorist's perspective is tempered by little objectivity. Instead, the terrorist lives in a self-contained world of purely subjective anger and pain. Because conscience consists of the awareness of other people's feelings as well as of one's own, the emotional terrorist's behavior often can be described as virtually without conscience. In this lack of conscience lies the dangerous potential of the true terrorist, and again, the degree of conscience in evidence is a useful measure in my work to anticipate the terrorist's destructiveness. An additional factor making the terrorist so dangerous is the fact that the terrorist, while in positively monomaniacal pursuit of her goal, feels fueled by a sense of omnipotence. Perhaps it is true that one imagines oneself omnipotent when in truth one is in a position of impotence, as in the case of losing one's familial control through dissolution. Whatever the source of the sensation of omnipotence, the terrorist believes herself to be unstoppable, and unbound by the constraints of conscience or empathy, believes that no cost either to the terrorist or to other family members, is too great to pay toward the achievement of the goal. The terrorist and the terrorist's actions know no bounds. The estimation of the extent of the terrorist's boundlessness presents the greatest challenge to my work. Intent only to achieve the goal, perhaps hell-bent is the most accurate descriptive phrase, the terrorist will take such measures as stalking a spouse or ex-spouse, physically assaulting the spouse or the spouse's new partners, telephoning all mutual friends and business associates of the spouse in an effort to ruin the spouse's reputation, pressing fabricated criminal charges against the spouse, including alleged battery and child molestation, staging intentionally unsuccessful suicide attempts for the purpose of manipulation, snatching children from the spouse's care and custody, vandalizing the spouse's property, murdering the spouse and or the children as an act of revenge. In my experience, both men and women are equally guilty of the above behavior, but on the whole, because it is men's dysfunctional behavior that is studied and reported upon, people do not realize that to the same extent, women are equally guilty of this type of violent behavior. My working definition, then, of a family terrorist or an emotional terrorist is a woman or man, but for the purposes of this work I refer only to women, who, pathologically motivated by unresolved tendencies from a problematic childhood, and pathologically insensitive to the feelings of other family members, obsessively seeks through unbounded action to achieve a destructive and therefore pathological goal with regard to other family members. Of course, this defining profile pertains to individuals in differing degrees. Many people unhappy within a relationship or made unhappy by the dissolution of a relationship may lapse into periods of irrational behavior. What characterizes the terrorist, however, is that the vindictive and destructive behaviors are consistent. The moments of calm and periods of lucidity are the lapses, temporary lulls in the storm. Also, there are women who, suffering chagrin and misery during or after the lifespan of a relationship, appear far more self-destructive than destructive to anyone else. For the other partner, contemplating leaving this kind of individual, the very thought of leaving such a person is made difficult and untenable by such frequently uttered protestations as, "I cannot live without you," and "without you, I might as well be dead." To be sure, many women exist extremely dependent within their relationships who, probably having suffered severe emotional betrayal during their childhood, genuinely feel that their life outside a relationship would be so lonely as to be unbearable. It is difficult to leave such a woman, and the man attempting to leave may well feel that by leaving he would be responsible for delivering a mortal blow to an already pathetic wretch. Men also are often kept in their relationships, which can only be likened to personal concentration camps, by the fact that they feel a genuine feeling of chivalry toward their partner. Women tend to put so much more of themselves into their relationships, and therefore suffer when these relationships fall apart. There is a valid question as to whether or not this sort of suicidally inclined individual may be deemed a terrorist. To many minds, this kind of individual no doubt would seem to fall more within the category of emotional blackmailer. I believe that sadly there are people deeply damaged by their childhoods who genuinely cannot face life by themselves. When dealing with such potential cases, however, I try to make the leaving partner understand that the suicidal inclinations predate the relationship by many years, and that however tragic the situation, one person simply cannot be held responsible for keeping another person alive. In some individuals, the authentic, though unhealthy, longing for death is a longing planted within them since early childhood, and there is very little a partner can do to alter the apparently inevitable course of that longing. Among true terrorists, however, threats of suicide can be seen to serve a largely manipulative role. In short, the terrorist says, "If you can't do as I tell you, I will kill myself." Whether suicide remains only a threat or is realized, the true terrorist uses suicide not so much as an expression of desperate grief, but as a weapon to be wielded against others. In working with clients struggling, either in relationships or with the dissolution of a relationship, I am faced with many questions, all relevant to gauging the woman's terrorist potential. Will the woman persevere in her efforts to financially ruin her partner? Is she sincere when she promises to kill her partner or have him killed, should he ever become involved in a new relationship? Are the threats of suicide genuine or manipulative? Will she carry out the promises of using the law to kidnap the children in order to hurt the ex-partner? Will she brainwash the children to such an extent that her ex-partner dare not form a new relationship? Emotional terrorism is by no means confined to the family context. I know an extremely successful woman in the world of fine arts. This woman has been haunted by a former assistant who, vicariously imagining herself to be the writer herself, dresses like her, stalks her, and issues public statements that it was she, not the writer, who created the works of art for which the writer is internationally famous. If the writer is to ensure her own safety, then very definite steps must be taken. In situations of emotional and family terrorism, there are two areas of work to be done: practical measures of protection, strategies for survival on the part of family members, and therapeutic work with the terrorist himself or herself. I must reiterate at this stage that both men and women are capable of terrorist tactics, but men tend to behave in a more physically violent manner within the family. Women, as I have shown, use far more subtle tactics, i.e., that of the terrorist, as opposed to outright war. The first step on the part of other family members toward limiting the terrorist's destructive potential is to understand the terrorist to be a terrorist. In a recent case, a Mr. Roberts described to me how during his marriage, he and his children faced a daily onslaught of verbal abuse from his wife. Mrs. Roberts was also physically violent to the children. Now that he has asked for a divorce, she is making use of every weapon in her arsenal. In the children's presence, she has used drugs and drunk alcohol to the point of extreme intoxication. She has staged several unsuccessful suicide attempts in front of the children, threatened over the telephone to do something stupid, promised to kill Mr. Roberts' new partner, and assured Mr. Roberts that when she is finished with him, he will not have a penny to his name. To Mr. Roberts, all of this behavior seemed perfectly usual. After all, he had witnessed this sort of commotion for 13 years of their marriage. When I suggested to him, "What you endured is emotional terrorism," he suddenly and for the first time was able to see his situation clearly. Now he realized his wife's behavior was neither appropriate nor acceptable. No, this was not the treatment that every man should expect from his wife, either in or out of marriage. No, he does not want his children to be subjected to such extreme behavior any longer. The fact of recognizing a terrorist is the essential first step. Then, because a terrorist is fueled by a feeling of omnipotence and is prepared to behave without bounds, usually encouraged by feminist therapists who insist that their clients suffer from low self-esteem, pragmatic measures must be taken to define clearly the boundaries of behavior. It is unfortunate that the legal situation which many divorce agreements mandate is open-ended. Certainly, when both parties to a divorce are reasonably well balanced, it is entirely fitting for the settlement to be flexible enough to incorporate changing financial circumstances, childcare capabilities, and visitation rights. When, however, one party to the divorce is an emotional terrorist, then both the confrontational divorce procedure and the resulting open-ended divorce settlement provide infinite opportunity for the courts, lawyers, and the entire battery of psychologists called in for evaluations to be used as the terrorist's weapon. In these cases, the court and the divorce procedure provide no boundaries for the terrorist. Instead, they allow the terrorist to continue to behave boundlessly. For this reason, when dealing with a terrorist, it is best for the divorce procedure and final decree to be as swift, as final, as absolute, as unequivocal as possible. Every practitioner or attorney handling divorces is familiar with clients described as litigious. Only when litigiousness is seen as a manifestation of terrorism can the course to swift and precise legal settlement be steered. To limit the terrorist's feelings of omnipotence, there are many effective measures. The guiding principle, as in the handling of political terrorists, must be, there is no negotiating with terrorists. Endless telephone calls, conversations, confrontations, trial get-back-togethers, correspondence, visitations, gestures of appeasement, and efforts to placate the terrorist's demands all serve to reinforce the terrorist's belief that she is accomplishing something. Only determined resolution in the face of terrorism shows the terrorist that her power is limited. Furthermore, for anyone dealing directly with terrorists, reassurances, ego boosts, positive strokes, and consolations are lamentably counterproductive. Mrs. Roberts soon found herself a feminist therapist, staunchly supporting the erroneous belief that all feelings and therefore behaviors are valid. Mrs. Roberts is told by this therapist that she has a right to feel and to behave in any manner she chooses, in callous disregard for the devastation inflicted upon the children. Such reassurances serve only to fortify the terrorist's already pathological, solipsistic, an eternally self-justifying perspective. If wishing to undertake the second sphere of disarming a terrorist, personal intervention with the terrorist herself, the therapist must be prepared to be straight, honest, and very direct. In my own dealings with women as terrorists, I have found on occasion that one quite simply can point out to the terrorist, "You are behaving like a terrorist. This is what you were doing. This is how you are being destructive. This is the destruction you were heading towards." And the terrorists, seeing themselves clearly for the first time, might be encouraged to reconsider their behavior. More commonly, however, extremely deep therapy is required. For the terrorist's behavior to change, there must first be a solid and fundamental change within the terrorist's psychological constitution. Usually, it is only by an in-depth excavation and resolution of early childhood pain that the terrorist can begin to gain a real, true, and level-headed perception of her own current situation. Direct intervention with the terrorist, like all forms of therapeutic intervention, can hope to achieve change only if the individual concerned wishes to change and possesses that vital yet ineffable quality, the will to help. When the will to help is lacking, there can be no change. If the terrorist cannot or will not change, one can only help the other family members to be resolute, be strong, and whenever possible, be distant.
Okay. Now that is one hell of an essay. And I remember the first time I read that, I found it almost a gut punch. And one of the things that astounds me, you said before we listened to that Erin, you said that you wrote that sometime in the 80s?
Yes, I was in America.
So we're talking 15, 20 years ago,
yes.
Roughly. Or might have been, am I doing my math wrong? The 80s would have been more than 20 years ago. What's changed since then?
Not much, because it's difficult to even consider change until there is a complete revolution in thinking that allows women to be as culpable as men, because at the moment women are trapped in really men's version of they're on this pedestal, and if they get off the pedestal, society comes down on them like a ton of bricks. Women, unfortunately, in a way, because men, as you said, men idolize women. They idolize women in a sense, like even their mothers, even if their mothers are aberrant. It's very difficult for a man to ever admit any of this. So he continues to keep the woman up on the pedestal. So the revolution has got to be that women and men can equally be victims and perpetrators of domestic violence, thereby imprisoning their children in a never-ending repeated pattern, and it's generational. I can trace 3 generations down my mother's side and my father's side, and I hopefully have transcended sufficiently so that the pattern isn't repeated, and that is really the work that I do and that I'm passionate about. You were damaged. It wasn't your fault. You were a child. You were born into the war, but it's up to you to stop the war. That goes equally for men and for women.
I think much of what you described there, although I don't think anything's changed except maybe to get worse in terms of enabling what you call the family terrorist, but at least in the psychological literature, you see more recognition now of something they call borderline personality disorder or personality disorder and everything. And, when I listen to your description of that, I'm like, she's describing a borderline personality or a histrionic personality very well here, although I think you were ahead of the curve in.
Yeah, I think that is true. And I think also there's much more of a recognition now that the figures are so unequivocal that essentially everybody, except those who have a vested positive financial interest in keeping the lie, that this has got to stop, that we've really got to turn the whole thing round and put all our emphasis on keeping children safe, because if children are marinated in violence, they go on to continue the violence.
Emotional or physical.
Yeah.
I tell you, too, and I know from the perspective of a child who grows up in that kind of, with that kind of person or persons as their parents,
You first off, we should say, you've mentioned before that the growing up with an abusive parent or an abusive environment does brain damage, literally changes the brain and how child's brain development, and they are more likely to go on to be abusers themselves. I think it is important probably for us to say most people who grow up in abusive environments do not necessarily grow up to be abusers.
I agree.
They're just at a terrifically higher risk for it.
Oh, yes.
Just like if you smoke cigarettes, you're at a terrifically higher risk of heart attack and cancer and whatnot. Same if you grew up in an abusive environment. But if you're a child growing up in something like that or under something like that as a parent, that just seems normal to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Deranged, delusional, abusive behavior, that's your model of what is normal. And you don't even know what your entire ability to relate to other people is somehow messed up by that. I don't want to see. I'm speaking from my own experience here, okay? And I grew up with a family terrorist, and I don't even remember the point at which it dawned on me, but it's sometime in my 20s that there was anything wrong with a single thing that had ever happened in my childhood. And then you start reading and listening and thinking about it, and it's almost shattering. You realize this isn't the way most things are or the way things are supposed to be. But I can see how with just one or two different changes in my life, I mean, I did eventually develop alcoholism, which is why I don't drink anymore. But, I can see how with just a few little turns, I could have been a batterer, which I wasn't, but I could have. I could have wound up in prison. I can see clearly on my own life path how sometimes, in some ways, it's almost sheer luck I didn't turn into a violent psychopath.
I think that's very true, but I think you also have to remember, I don't know about in your family, but there's no question if you've got disturbed and abusive parents, you don't bring anybody home, that also cuts you off because you can't. So that isolates you even further. So I always think, I've often said to people, what saved you? And they'll tell you, it's usually a mentor. I had a mentor at 9 because I had to go into a holiday home because my parents were going abroad. And Miss Williams, who ran the holiday home, saved me. Without her, I'd definitely have been in prison.
Tell us a little bit about Miss Williams.
Miss Williams was 6'7". She ran a holiday home. It was a family manor house. And she was left the manor house with no cash. The boys got the cash, as they did in those days.
Manor house, you're saying? Manor house?
A manor house is a great big house. It's on an estate. It has 240 acres of land. It's one of those big things you see in Downton Abbey, that kind of thing. And there were 40 children whose parents were abroad. My memoir is called Infernal Child. I was extremely dangerous as a child, extremely. I nearly killed a girl. And what happened when I got to Miss Williams is she's the one person who could see through and saw me as a terrified child. And she took me under her capacious wing, and I admired her. She never raised her voice to any of the children, any of us. But she rode ambulances during the war to rescue people. She was a magistrate and a golf champion. And that's the woman I wanted to be. Well, I didn't manage a golf champion. I didn't manage to drive ambulances. But I did manage to make a small change in the world.
Oh, it's amazing how a good person can make a positive difference in our life. I understand that we have somebody waiting on hold. Jose, James, do we still have somebody on hold waiting to talk?
Yes, I'm whole. I'm here.
Hey, Jose, welcome to the show. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, I was listening to that part about the children, and I'm gonna tell you now, my oldest daughter is in her 30s, and then I have a son that's in his late 20s, and my youngest is in her early 20s, and I mean, it's been 16, 17 years, and it's gotten to the point where I get sick thinking about it because I don't get them back. You know, they haven't come back. So I just want to make that point. And you know, I mean, I'm like, you know, a handful of pills from doing what Earl did, and that's from frustration because no one listens and no one understands the pain that you actually go through without your children. You know,
so Jose, you're an alienated dad?
Yeah.
You've been alienated from your children. I think there's almost no greater pain than I can imagine than that. Go ahead, tell us more.
Well, it didn't dawn on me until last year. I've been fighting so hard and so long to get to see them and to have some kind of relationship, and it just dawned on me that, you know, the fight is over because these aren't the same babies that I had when all of this really started happening. And
hey, Jose, could you tell me, this is Erin talking to you, tell me about what actually happened. Why are the children in this situation?
Well, I mean, I went through years of that same family terror thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't, you know, I mean, and to me, I didn't even realize it because, you know, it was taught to me that men are batterers and women cannot be victims. And so for all those years of the get out, come back, you know, I mean, I didn't realize. And then finally in 1995, she told the police I hit her. And this is December 16th, 1995. I wound up in a snowstorm, 17 of them back to back in New York, and here I was with a house and can't go to it. I sat in jail for a week, and finally we went back and forth to court where it was just found out that, oh, well, he didn't hit her. Well, I told you that 6 months ago, and I wasn't pleading to nothing. And then finally I said, I had enough of this. I've been, for the last 15 years of this marriage, I've been just get out, come back. I'm always on the defense. I can't get myself together. Nothing can get right. I keep losing jobs. And I finally just said, that's it. I walked away, and I just said, you know, let's just go for the divorce. And the divorce ended in 2000. It took 2 years for that divorce to end. And I finally gave her everything, property, stock, everything. Just take it and go. She went to the family court after I gave her, the judge in the Supreme Court said if you give her everything, then that will be considered your child support for the next, and she calculated it 20 years. Child support's paid up. Fine. Take it. She went to the family court and filed a separate order for child support in spite of the fact that the stipulated agreement said that the child support was paid in full, and then she was telling my children I never gave them money. I know. It's appalling. Is there anybody in touch that you know that are in touch with your children? Well, I mean, my own family does the same bullcrap that she does. And so instead of them saying, you know, your father, you know, he's done a lot for us even when we was children and the same things was happening in our household. He'd go out and go to work and bring back whatever money he could and help, you know, feed us. So how can you, you know, and listen to this woman say, no, they don't. They don't do anything. And you want to know what? My sister has a master's in social work. And even 3 years ago when I started on this journey, reading some of your own readings and doing research, and I brought this to her attention, she said, well, women can't be victims of domestic violence. Well, how'd you get an MSW?
I'm sorry, I know. Worker? Well, I think this is the problem, though. Most of the teaching in colleges are actually done by feminists, and even the books all stipulate exactly that same thing that you're suffering from, that it's essentially women are innocent victims of all men's violence, and you have lost everything. Have you any friends? No, I don't, because I'm considered like a radical. You know, and because I've been feeling this way and saying these things since the 80s, and it's Can you join a men's group? Have you got a men's group in your area?
Well, I started something for myself, and I've been fighting to get that going, and I've been meeting, talking with Terry. Started over the years, and there are some things I've been doing, but it's to the point where I'm almost being minimized and censored because of the way I feel. And I want to say this one thing, that back in 2000 last year. When I finally had enough of the being on the deadbeat dad list and my credit being attacked and can't find a job and all kinds of things, I finally said, enough of this stuff, because I didn't mind paying the extra child support. But then when you start attacking me like I'm just some kind of an animal, I took it back to the family court. And then they realized their mistake finally, after 12 years of paying double child support and being branded. Oh. That's when I realized, I lost the fight, because I might have won.
But you haven't lost the fight.
I did lose the fight because I lost my children, and they're grown. Yeah. I'm a grandfather. I don't even see my grandchildren. So, it's a loss. I won the battle. I lost the fight.
Yeah. Hold on, Jose. Erin?
My feeling for you is that I know you feel you've lost the fight, but you haven't. You went back, and the court knows that you were innocent. You have been an innocent victim of a very cruel woman. But in time, I can't promise anything will happen with your children, except that you have to stay alive. You absolutely have to, for their sake, because it gives them a chance to, after they experience real life, to have a look and perhaps come back to you. So you take care of yourself. I know, look, this fight is awful. I've lost everything I owned twice. A house, cars, everything. I've been bankrupted by feminists. I've been homeless. I've been in a homeless family unit 15 years ago in one room. Yeah? But you know what?
I am now.
I got back. I know. But we go there because we are not going to don't let her make you take any pills, because then you really would be a loser. Don't do it. You have to. All I can offer, and I'm a very religious person, is that I will pray for you.
That will be the same for me. And furthermore, Jose, I take it very seriously when you say something like you just did, and don't do it. And I want to talk to you after this show, all right?
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely want to talk to you after this show, brother.
And you now keep close to A Voice for Men. This is a program where men and women were working together to stop all this happening. You are a survivor. Believe me, you're a survivor.
You are, and you're going to get through this. My friend, I've been homeless. I've been desperate. I've been in that deep well of pain so bad I just wanted to die, and I almost did it. Yeah. And I can only tell you is that I am glad I didn't. I found a purpose in life. I don't have a lot of material things. But by getting involved and helping people, part of what we do on A Voice for Men is exactly to help men know that there's hope out there. And we're getting louder, and we're getting heard by more and more people. And you are going to survive this. I'm not going to tell you to man up, because the next person who tells me to man up, I'm going to punch him in the face. You are going through some horrible pain, and it is just important that you know that you're heard, and there is nothing wrong with you. And there is nothing wrong with feeling this pain. There's nothing wrong if you're crying, cry. I have spilled gallons of tears over some of the things that have happened in my life. But you can survive this, brother. And we're going to talk after this show, right? Is that a promise?
Yeah.
All right. Do you want
God bless you, Jose. God bless you.
Okay. Do you want to say anything more right now, or?
No, I tell you, I tried to bring this up like I told you the other day in my dissertation. And even the school shot me down and particularly put me out of school because I was trying to address this issue in a dissertation.
Yes, and the universities, they don't want to hear about misandry, and they don't want to hear about male disposability. And that's one of the things we have to fight to change. Because this
This affects everybody. Even in the long run, this doesn't just hurt men. It hurts women, too, in ways they can't even see. But the awareness is out there, and it's growing, and people are learning, and we're learning to help each other, and men got to help each other, and that is part of what we do here. So, Jose, I'm going to talk to you after the show, okay?
Sure. Okay, I'll be here.
God bless, brother. You relax, and we'll be talking soon.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good one. Those sorts of things are very hard to hear. But one of the things.
But how many millions of men, over these years? It's the heartbreak of it all. If this is the last 40-something years that this has happened, it's been so swift, this total annihilation of men and men's reputations and the need for men, that it's still there and always will be there. And it's a tragedy. And all we can do is to be here on a phone and listen and try and do the best we can to help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if there's a phrase that we use on A Voice for Men that people outside the community, they don't like it. They think it's crass. They think it's rude. They think it's vulgar. They think it's in their face. They think it's violent. We say, fuck their shit up.
Yes.
And what we mean is these gender ideologues, these misandrists, these people, these government officials, these people at these foundations, many of them, there are good ones, but we need to fuck their shit up. And by shit, we mean their garbage, the lies they tell, the manipulations they use. Some of these family terrorists you're talking about are social workers now. Yeah. And now they have the power to continue their reign of terror on other people.
Well, they make it their business to get in places of power. And unfortunately, it goes right the way through, whether it's academia or publishers, the rampant, arrogant, feminist attitude is that whatever the cost, because they don't believe in family life anyway, but whatever the cost, they will eradicate men. That's their big boast. And normal people are not involved in all this. They don't even know it's going on under their nose.
No, and we need to activate people's compassion for men and boys. Yes. Mm. I mean, I remember that. How can somebody who's a mother who has sons throw the father out of their life, badmouth him endlessly to those boys, and then what does she think her own boys will become? You've used the phrase emotional incest, and I wonder sometimes if, well, now my boys are going to be my substitute husband. Well, that doesn't work. I don't think they choose that consciously, but it's almost like subconsciously they must think this sometimes.
No, a lot of them do it consciously. The biggest form of incest has always been mother-son damage, but nobody ever talks about it again. But it is, and it's those boys that have been handpicked and groomed by their incestuous mothers who actually go on to become serial killers. It's known. The majority of serial killers have incestuous mothers and relationships with incestuous mothers.
Now, do you mean literally, physically sexual relations?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it happens between fathers and daughters, but it's more usually found out because if a woman's sexual relationships with her son, it's much harder to actually verify. Because often it's as simple as I was talking to somebody years ago about a serial killer because he was on the case. He was a psychiatrist on the case. He was telling me about this man. And he just said, just as he was about to put the phone out, and of course he was sleeping in his mother's bed till he was 15. And I said, well, didn't that cross your mind that is where all the problems lay? And he did go ahead. Actually, he murdered 18 homosexual young men.
And I've even had people tell me it's misogynist and hateful that when a man does something horrible like that
Colorado shooter who shot up a bunch of school children last year, to say that his mother may have had something to do with his emotional state, even though he was living alone with her, why, that's just the most horrible thing you suggest.
That's the most honest thing you can say.
I'm afraid so. We're bad-mouthing a dead woman, but so we don't know, but the question should be asked, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as far as I was concerned, I dealt with it a lot because the mothers would come in with their children. And there's one particular mother I can think of that I suspected, because they slept in dormitories, so in a way it stopped all sorts of aberrant behavior. And this one particular woman, she had picked on one of her sons, and she kept trying to get into his bunk bed. And eventually, unfortunately, the social workers decided that she needed to be rehoused, and I was against it. I explained exactly why she shouldn't be left alone with this boy. Anyway, she got her new house and she moved on, and the man, I know what's happened to the man. He's now a pedophile. This is the underbelly of society that nobody wants to know about. They want nice, well-presented little children who perhaps go to Bernardo's or somewhere nice and middle class and clean, but it's the underbelly that we have to actually care about. And my feeling is that we have generations now, particularly in England, generations of children who have been not permitted to have a father or a father relationship with their fathers. And they have grown up feral, and now we don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, and that's another hidden thing. I don't have a link to it handy, but a very good libertarian philosopher, I'm not necessarily a libertarian, but he's very good, Stefan Molyneux, had an incredible video he did that's on YouTube that's worth looking for, Stefan Molyneux, on attachment disordered children and how we have a whole generation of them now of children who've grown up not properly biologically attached to their mothers or fathers, and the social damage, or sequelae as social scientists would say, is hideous. And even when you speak of incest, yes, there's literal incest, but there's emotional incest too.
Yes.
Even if you've never had sexual relations with your father or mother, if they've used you as their emotional outlet, their emotional crutch, to fulfill their emotional needs and fantasies.
Well, I define incest very widely. It's when an adult puts their emotional, sexual feelings on their children's shoulders. So the child really never has a childhood. They are the crook for whichever parent is using them and abusing them emotionally for their own satisfaction.
And then these kids wind up, some of them grow up and manage to transcend all that.
Sure they do.
But others, they wind up drug addicted, homeless, in prison, maybe serial killers in the extreme cases. And being a parent is so important, and fathers are so important. And I know I'm now just ranting, but children need both parents desperately.
Well, we do know that young girls with fathers, present fathers who care for them, love them, they're less likely to get pregnant in teenage, and they're liable to have their periods much later because they have a safe pair of male arms that they can trust.
That's actually an odd thing, but it's true. I even ran into one stupid fool on YouTube who didn't want to believe it, but an enormous amount of research actually does show, it's been confirmed by multiple studies, that young girls without the father present in the home go into puberty on average about a year earlier than girls who have a father at home. And a stepfather doesn't count.
No, it's biological father. The safest place for a child is under one roof with a biological mother and father, and the second safest place for a child, if there is a divorce and separation, is to live with a biological father, because the next most dangerous person is the stepfather or the boyfriend. Now, those are all proven statistics. So men, when all the chips are down, are actually safe pair of hands for their children.
And even if there is a divorce, the ideal relationship is one in which it's as close to 50-50 time with both parents.
Absolutely.
And the parents transcend whatever mutual hatred they had to concentrate on the business at hand of the children and leave all the other crap behind.
Well, normal people, normal couples would break up. And they actually are perfectly capable of prioritizing their children's needs, and they come first. It's the people with abnormal behavior patterns who can't do that, because the children are objects. They're not real. They're not human.
And we have this ideology out there that's teaching them that these abnormal attitudes are the correct attitudes. This whole business of patriarchy and oppressive men and men are no good, that is a mindset that teaches dysfunction.
I agree.
And part of what we're arguing against.
And we will continue to argue against it for the rest of our lives.
I hope we don't need the rest of our lives. I think a change is coming. I truly believe it. I truly believe it.
I see a young generation of women coming up who are actually very, very curious about, because they've suffered their mothers, their feminist mothers. And I see a much more feminine look among the younger generations. And I went to a conference, and the first time was full of young feminist women. They fully agreed they wanted to work with men on this subject of domestic violence, and I left thrilled.
That was just a few years ago, wasn't it?
That was this year.
That was this year.
Yeah, it was Women of the World, the WOW Festival at Festival Hall, and it was.
Oh, there's a video of you talking at that.
Them, yeah.
Yeah. I know some of them were giving you some arguments, some rather incoherent arguments, but you're saying off camera and whatever, there were a lot of open-minded people there?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The first time I felt that exhilarated.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've hit about the 2-hour mark here, and I think maybe we want to start winding up, unless there's somebody left who wants to talk to us, and I don't think we do. So, is there anything you'd like to end the show on, Erin?
It was great to talk to everybody, particularly was obviously Andre and Jose, and I know you want to talk to Jose now, Jose, right? Lovely to hear everything that was said today, and we'll keep talking.
We'll be back in 2 weeks, same time, same channel, and keep on fighting the good fight, everybody. Remember, there is hope at the end of all this. James, can we roll the outro? Thank you very much, everybody. See you next week, or 2 weeks from now. You have been listening to Domestic Violence Revelations with Erin Pizzey and me, her co-host, Dean Esme. Our show's opening music and closing music is known as Sunshine and Eternal Hope, respectively, and is by Kevin MacLeod and used under Creative Commons Attribution License, with a link in the show notes. We also want to thank James Huff, Christina Hansen, Karen Strawn, and Paul Elam, and all of those who are part of the A Voice for Men community for their support for this show. Remember, if you're a victim of domestic violence, no matter if you're a man or a woman, gay or straight, adult or child, no matter what your race, your ethnicity, your religious views, your sexual orientation, or anything else, what you went through or are going through now is not okay. You should not be afraid to talk about it with people who understand and care. Just remember to talk to people who do understand and not to ideologues who fear the truth or will marginalize you and your experiences. Remember, the truth about domestic abuse is often painful to hear, especially to ideologues, and especially to those who've been through it and been marginalized and ignored. But remember, in truth, there is hope and healing. And we hope you'll be a part of helping to spread the truth and the healing.
Please join us next time on Domestic Violence Revelations with Erin Pizzey and yours truly, Dean Esme. God bless.